Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And what, I wonder, is our responsibility as wondering, exploring species on planet Earth? As a geologist back in 2012, my search for answers to the question, where do we come from, took me to a stretch of rocky shore below a cow pasture on the east coast of Scotland. The place might not look that impressive to most folks, especially on a foggy day when the sea just beyond is heard more than seen. Yet that rocky outcrop at Sycamore Point is among the most important of places to geologists because of what it reveals about Earth history and the human mind. Today, it's widely accepted that Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. But until the late 18th century, the sanctioned Christian belief was that Earth was less than 6,000 years old. The evidence for that largely came from the book of Genesis and other religious documents. And from such evidence, James Ussher, the Archbishop of the Church of Ireland in the mid-1600s, determined that creation began in 4004 BC on October 22nd in the evening. People could get into a lot of trouble for professing the heresy that Earth was any older. Now, astute observers saw plenty of evidence that the Earth was in fact much older, but the taboo on saying so persisted for another couple hundred years, with only a few brave souls willing to say anything different. I need to make sure I'm being heard. It's good? Okay. Enter James Hutton, a Scottish naturalist and farmer, and one of my scientific heroes. Hutton observed that each year floodwaters deposited a very thin layer of soil on his fields. And he got to thinking, if these thin layers of soil were what formed those thick sandstone rocks in the nearby hills, it must have taken a really long time to accumulate that much sediment. And the process of transforming that dirt into rock must have taken time too. He also noticed that some of the rock layers were tilted, not flat, as they would have been deposited originally. What forces deformed them, and how long did that take? From his observations of Earth processes and the rocks he studied in his many travels, he developed an idea of how those rocks formed and where different types of rocks would be found. In 1788, he set off in a boat along the Scottish coast to confirm a key prediction. He believed he would find rocks of two distinctly different ages and compositions juxtaposed against each other. And find them he did. A series of tilted dark sandstone beds called greywackies, standing almost vertically, capped by nearly flat-lying layers of red sandstone. Now, Hutton brought along his friends, John Playfair and Sir James Hall, both pillars of the Scottish Enlightenment. And as they stood on that shore, Hutton read to them an amazing tale that he could discern in the rock record. That upturned greywackie represented sediment that had been deposited or accumulated slowly on the ocean floor. The layers were buried under more rocks or more sediment until pressure and heat caused them to lithify or turn to rock. Then more pressure folded them. And then the tilted layers were uncovered slowly through the process of erosion. That's part one of the story. Chapter 2 is that new sediment was then deposited in layers on the greywackie's eroded surface. So it was submerged again and then more sediment deposited on top. And that material was buried, lithified, tilted slightly, and then uplifted and eroded again to form the surface that Hutton and his companions stood upon. Deposition, burial, deformation, uplift, and erosion in 2 cycles. He knew there was no way that could happen in only 6,000 years. No way. And as he pondered that ancient story represented there, he said, "We find no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end." And his companions got it. Playfair later wrote, "The mind seemed to grow giddy by looking so far into the abyss of time." When I think of Sychar Point and what happened there, I am overwhelmed by 3 awarenesses. The first is the unceasing dynamic processes that make Earth seem almost alive. The second is the incredible vastness of time that make human lifespans, like mine, seem minuscule, almost irrelevant. And the third is the awesome capacity for the human mind to comprehend, to interpret the evidence, contemplate deep time, and comprehend our place in the universe. Standing on that spot where Hutton stood 224 years before, I was moved to tears. Of course, Hutton didn't get it all right. The study of the Earth, the solar system, the universe has evolved far beyond his limited knowledge and techniques, so that now geologists know that the Greywacke at Sychar Point is about 435 million years old. And the Younger Sandstone is about 370 million years old. And so much more has happened. We know so much more. Now that the James Webb Telescope is sending back images, we are closer than ever to observing the vestige of a beginning of our universe. For as the telescope picks up more distant objects, more light years away, it also sees farther back in time. A few galaxies in those images are so far away that we are seeing them as they were just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang. We are looking back into the history of the universe, 13 billion years. As a geologist, I'm used to thinking in deep time, but that just defies comprehension. So as we learn more about the universe, the Earth, and Earth's inhabitants, we may have a better scientific explanation of where we come from. But what does it mean in terms of who we are? A couple years ago, I came across an amazing book, Journey of the Universe by Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker. In a scant 108 pages, the authors present an origin story that synthesizes what science reveals about the universe in a way that is every bit as awe-inspiring for me as Genesis was to Bishop Ussher. They write, "The great discovery of contemporary science is that the universe is not simply a place, but a story in which we are immersed, to which we belong, and out of which we arose. This story has the power to awaken us more deeply to who we are. We are the universe in human form. And every time we are drawn to look up into the night sky and reflect on the awesome beauty of the universe, we are actually the universe reflecting on itself. And this changes everything." The story of the universe is replete with twists and turns, serendipitous events without which Earth and Earth's inhabitants could not be. Although it is not a story of intelligent design, it is a story of elegance and creativity at all levels of existence. Imagine the beginning, the Big Bang that caused an immediate expanse of matter from a tiny speck. Did you know that the rate of expansion If the rate of expansion had been any slower, like even a tiny % slower, matter would have just recollapsed. And if it had been any faster, the matter would have spread too quickly for attraction to bring bits together to form structures. There are so many more events that occurred because conditions were just right for them. Like the dynamic heating and cooling of Earth that eventually led to oceans on the surface, which in turn created life. The way that cells adapt to the environment through a process of trial and error that leads to more effective forms. Did you know that in the time that life first appeared on Earth nearly 4 billion years ago, the sun's temperature has increased by 25%? 25%. But complex interacting systems on Earth actually changed the atmosphere in ways that regulated surface temperatures as the sun got hotter, thus maintaining conditions suitable for life. And what allowed life forms to change? Well, probably accidental mutations, genetic mutations that were more or less successful in the changing conditions, but also the amazing genetic code that preserved those successful mutations so that they could be passed down. All of these ideas lead Swim and Tucker to suggest perhaps the nature of the universe as a whole is shaped by the creativity of its parts. And like the genetic code, the animal mind also records successful strategies and habits that are passed down to offspring. In particular, our complex human brain holds a vast, though incomplete, understanding of the universe. For good or ill, we influence the evolution of all the systems on Earth and maybe far beyond Earth as well. And we can comprehend that. Perhaps Earth and all of us are part of that continually evolving creativity of the universe. Knowing that, perhaps it is our job, as Swim and Tucker suggest, to bring forth a new coherence in the planet as a whole, as we align ourselves with those dynamics of Earth's life. One key aspect of the universal story is how various individual elements interact with one another. Astrophysicist Jedida Eisler says great things happen at intersections. Stars are born at the messy intersections of gas and dust, instigated by gravity's irrevocable pull. Stars die by the same intersection, this time flung outward in a violent collision of smaller atoms, intersecting and efficiently fusing into altogether new and heavier things. As an African-American woman physicist, Eisler knows a lot about intersections and intersectionality. She points out that those who have lived at the intersections are used to seeing things in multiple ways and are well equipped to bring diverse perspectives to the multifaceted, multidisciplinary problems that face us today. Problems like disease and climate change, genetic editing, social inequity. The religious naturalist view is that if we see the natural world as all there is and recognize that we are not the center of the universe, but a small and significant part of it, then morality and justice are in our hands. There is no divine presence who is going to get us out of this mess. We must be the ones we've been waiting for. Whether or not you see divinity in the unfolding of the universe, and you'll notice there's some tension in our readings today about that. I think it's clear that we humans have wreaked havoc on our little blue ball of planet, and we are the only species that can really do something about it. That is, if humans are to continue. I think There's a lot that species probably will do, whether we are here or not, to regulate systems, to change things. But if we want to be here, we got to do something. So what might happen if we Homo sapiens, sapiens meaning wise, use our intelligence not to divide and categorize, but to understand and relate? What if we use our creativity, our awareness of our interdependence to maintain a healthy environment for life on this planet? What might happen if we don't? But how do we come together? The project is so huge, and we don't have the blueprints. Besides, we are so small. The only way I see it is to find more and more partners, to join in the work of restoring our planet and the relationships between members of our species and with all life on Earth. Yesterday, the NVUU Social Justice Committee had its annual retreat to set priorities and projects for the coming year. It was a dynamic and exciting meeting. Among the projects set for the year are efforts to close a leaking landfill at the north end of the county, to eliminate a source of pollution in the Napa River. It's among other impacts of that landfill. Another is local efforts to minimize climate impacts through personal acts and larger movements. Still others focus on food insecurity, advocating for participation in our democracy, as Lenore will be doing this afternoon, and caring for those in our community who need our support. I hope you will join these efforts in the ways that are most meaningful to you. There is joy and purpose to be found as we use our gifts collectively for good. Standing at Sycamore Point with the ghost of Hutton, gazing back 224 years and 435 million years, that was a religious experience for me. My knowledge of geology and the history of scientific thought, the story of the story, gave me an insight into something so much bigger than myself, that I was flooded with awe and delight at the miracle of it. The story of the universe may not be your origin story, but it is mine. It is at the intersection of science and spirituality, where dogma and creed are not required, only a sense of wonder. May we experience the world with a sense of wonder and belonging. May we align ourselves with the underlying dynamics of Earth's life. May we recognize all living things as siblings, the stars as ancestors, and the future in our hands. Amen.